morning. Welcome everyone, especially if you're visiting with us. We want to give you a special welcome. To catch everyone up, today we are finishing our months-long overview of the New Testament with a look at the second half of Revelation. We looked at the first half of Revelation last week. And just to remind you of the approach that I am taking in this overview, trying to address the following questions. First, how would the original audience have understood it? And second, how is this understanding important to us today? Now, I want to comment on that just a little bit. First of all, addressing that first question, in all honesty, is not that hard. Okay? A lot of details are given. Basically, the writer wants his readers to be able to understand what it is he's writing, even though he uses a lot of figures. He also includes a lot of explanation, especially as we get into the second half of Revelation. Where things get tough is the fact that history has not always unfolded in the way the original audience would have expected. Okay? That is basically what we deal with. That's not unique in Scripture. Okay? Look at Jonah, for example. Jonah preached a sermon. In 40 days, Nineveh will be destroyed. He preached that in Nineveh. Well, the people of Nineveh repented. God showed mercy and did not destroy Nineveh. Okay? Think about the prophecies of Jesus. The people of Jesus' time knew those prophecies and were expecting their fulfillment, but not in the way that Jesus fulfilled them. And I doubt that the people, that the original audience would have had any better understanding. Okay? We don't always understand what is told to us in the way that it's going to be fulfilled. And it's also the case that some prophecies, as I mentioned this last week, some prophecies have a secondary fulfillment. And it's only when you see the secondary fulfillment that the whole thing makes sense. Okay? That it kind of, there are some things that you can see, all right, yeah, this was fulfilled, this doesn't seem to fit, and then later on, oh, okay, he's talking about something else. He's basically talking about two different things at the same time. Okay? And in some cases, that secondary fulfillment might not have taken place yet. Okay? So that's what we deal with. I'm not going to get into any of that. Okay? I'm going to focus on what it meant to the original audience. I might, mention here and there some of the more major things that didn't turn out the way they'd expect. Okay? But I'm not going to focus on that at all. So let's dive into chapter 12, which is a story of the birth of Jesus. Not like the ones we typically hear this time of year. It's told from a very spiritual perspective and relating to the context of his audience. Okay? How does the story unfold here? We have a pregnant woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. By the way, the number 12 in Hebrew numerology is God's people. Okay? She is pregnant. And there's this dragon who is identified as the devil and Satan, the ancient serpent. Okay? He's ready to devour her child. She gives birth to a male child who will shepherd or rule all nations with an iron scepter. Language sound kind of familiar to you? Okay? He's making it clear to his audience that this is the story of Jesus. Okay? The birth of Jesus. Okay? But the dragon does not devour the child, obviously. The child is caught up to God. Okay? He's telling the story, at a high level very quickly here. Because the point really in all of this is that as a result, there's a war that takes place in heaven, and the dragon is thrown down. He's thrown out of heaven, okay? Thrown down to earth. where he persecuted the woman and the rest of her offspring, those who keep God's commands and have the testimony about Jesus. This is the context in which John's audience finds themselves. Okay? Being persecuted by this dragon, who, by the way, knows his time is short. Okay? That is also mentioned in here. All right? They're experiencing persecution, but in the big picture, this is all a part of the dragon's ultimate defeat. Okay? It's all a part of Satan's ultimate defeat. That's the context that he's trying to provide in this chapter. And then he moves into chapter 13, where two beasts are introduced to the story. Okay? There's first the sea beast. The dragon gave this beast his power, his throne, and great authority. Okay? So the authority, this is working together with the dragon. Satan is giving this beast power and authority. And there's not a lot of detail here about the beast. There's a picture painted, but more details are given in chapter 17 that make it pretty clear that he's talking about the Roman Empire. Okay? When he's talking about this beast, he's talking about the Roman Empire, getting its power from Satan. The whole earth was amazed and followed the beast. Okay? Remember how big the Roman Empire was at this time. It wasn't literally the whole earth, but from their perspective, it seemed like it. Okay? They worshipped the beast. Okay, the whole earth, not literally. We'll see that there are some exceptions here, but to a large extent, the whole earth was worshiping the beast. And he was permitted to wage war against the saints and to conquer them. This demands the perseverance and faith of the saints. This is how he concludes his description of this sea beast. All right? They're going to be persecuted. It requires perseverance and faith. Okay? And then he introduces a second beast, the earth beast. He had two horns like a lamb, but he sounded like a dragon. Okay? That like a lamb, all right? Who do we think of as the lamb? Even in Revelation, Jesus is referred to as a lamb. Okay? But he sounded like a dragon. And he's not speaking the words of Jesus. He may look like him, but he doesn't sound like him. All right? He exercises all the authority of the first beast on his behalf and compels the earth and those who live on it to worship the first beast. In the Roman Empire, as the emperors, the Caesars, gained more power, they began to refer to themselves as gods. They began to compel the people to worship them, okay, as God. What we're seeing here in this earth beast, the second beast, who's also, by the way, called the false prophet at times in Revelation, this seems to be the religious power. Okay, we have the Roman Empire, now we're having the religious cult, if you will. Okay, the emperor worship being described. And he requires everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to be given a mark on his right hand or on his forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, the beast's name, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. The one who has understanding must calculate the number of the beast, because it is the number of a man. His number is 666. Now, there's been a lot of wisdom over the centuries. A lot of people have calculated this number of the beast and come up with a lot of answers, all different. Okay? All right? I'm not going to get into all that. I just want to point out one thing here. The number 6 in Hebrew numerology is 1 less than 7. Okay, well that's one less than 7 to all of us, all right? But being, being 1 less than 7, all right? 7 is the number of divine perfection. 6 is short of that. Okay? 6 is short of perfection. Basically, it's synonymous with sin. All right? And it may be just as simple as that. He's talking about evil here. All right? I think what's really more important in this passage is not the number 666, but earlier, where he talks about no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark. Okay? They're putting constraints, economic constraints on people. All right? You need to worship the emperor, or you can't buy things. You can't sell things. All right? The wisdom comes from discerning the evil here. All right? Discern that this emperor worship is not the way to go in spite of all the pressure. Okay? Worship God. Follow God. And then in chapter 14, we see this image of the harvest of the earth. And at this point, I should say, we've seen introduction of some characters. We're going to see an unfolding of a story. At this point, it's still pretty high level, the pictures that we're getting. He's going to get into more detail as he goes on. All right? First, this is common. As you read through Revelation, you keep seeing him focus back on Christians or Christian martyrs. All right? This is, he's telling about what's going to happen, but we need to see how we, okay, I'm not talking about we today in the 21st century, but the Christians of the time, how do they fit into this whole picture? Okay? He's mentioned this 144,000 before, and also in the same context talked of a vast multitude of believers. Okay? Don't take the 144,000 too literally here. Again, 12 is the number of God's people. All right? We got 12 times 12 times 10 times 10 times 10. 10 is the earth's number, okay? Or human completion, really, I think is a better explanation of 10. Human completion. Okay, so these are on Mount Zion, standing with the Lamb, okay? And there are 3 proclamations then given. All right? The proclamations are not directed toward the Christians. All right? The proclamations are directed elsewhere. Fear God and give Him glory because the hour of His judgment has come. Judgment. It has fallen. Babylon the Great has fallen. Okay, Babylon. Babylon was the captor of the Jewish people a few centuries earlier. They had been taken into captivity. They had been conquered by Babylon. Babylon no longer existed at the time of this writing. Okay? But as a metaphor, okay, this was the evil empire. Okay? Or the evil city. Babylon was both a city and an empire. All right? And as he gets into more detail a little bit later on, he's going to make it clear that he's talking about Rome, not Babylon. Okay? He's talking about Rome, the city. If anyone worships the beast and his image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he will also drink the wine of God's wrath. This is judgment on not only the empire, not only the city, but on those who are following, who are worshiping the emperor. Okay? And then we see the harvest itself. 2 phases. There is the grain harvest first, and then the grape harvest. A little bit different And we see the grain harvest. It's a harvest. Okay, when we see the grape harvest, all right, they're treading the grapes, and the grapes are bleeding. It's blood. Okay, they're put into the winepress of God's wrath. Okay, you might think back to the words of John the Baptist here, talking about Jesus. He will put the grain into his barn and burn the chaff with unquenchable fire. Okay, basically two phases of a harvest. All right, the grain being what you want, and then in this case, the grapes are not what you want. All right. Again, it's big picture here, and as we go, we get a little bit more detail. We now get some detail on God's judgment. Okay, the 7 bowls of God's wrath are described in chapters 15 and 16. Again, starting with God's people. Okay, keeping them again separate from this wrath that he's talking about. Those who had won the victory over the beast, his image, and the number of his name were standing on the sea of glass with harps from God. Okay? Those who had won the victory, who had persevered, who had kept the faith. All right, they're with God. And here come the bowls of wrath. And I should say these bowls of wrath, they're called plagues. And they're very reminiscent of the 10 plagues on Egypt. Okay, we don't see 10 of them, we just see 7. But there's connections. I won't identify all of the connections. You'll see some of them. But there are connections with those plagues. Bowl 1, severely painful sores broke out on the people who had the mark of the beast and who worshipped his image. Bowl 2, the sea turned to blood like a dead man's, and all life in the sea died. Bowl 3, the rivers and the springs of water became blood. Bowl 4, people were burned by the intense heat from the sun. Bowl 5, the beast's kingdom is plunged into darkness. Bowl 6, the great river Euphrates was dried up to prepare the way for the kings from the east. So they assembled them at the place called in Hebrew Armageddon. Oh, that's a name that gets a lot of attention, isn't it? You got the number 666, you got the name Armageddon. What's he mean? All right. It can be translated as Mount Megiddo, which does not exist. There is no Mount Megiddo. There is a city called Megiddo, or was at that time, a city called Megiddo on the plain of Megiddo. A plain, not a mountain. Okay? So this is not an actual place. All right? All right? They are coming together. They're lining up for battle. But we don't see any battle. As we get to Bowl 7, it's done. The great city split into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. Babylon the Great was remembered in God's presence. He gave her the cup filled with the wine of his fierce anger. Okay? Babylon, Rome, is receiving God's judgment. Okay? More detail unfolds as we get into the next 2 chapters, 17 and 18. The fall of Babylon, again, and it's in chapter 17 where we get a lot of these additional details that make it clear he's talking about Rome, he's talking about the Roman Empire. Okay? Come, I will show you the judgment of the notorious prostitute who sits on many waters. All right? This prostitute is a woman sitting on a scarlet beast. He describes this beast basically the same way that he described the first beast, the sea beast. It seems to be the same beast. Okay? And the woman was drunk on the blood of the saints and the blood of the witness to Jesus. Again, so he identifies this beast. It has 7 heads. Okay? This beast has 7 heads, and he says these 7 heads are the 7 mountains on which the city was built. The woman is sitting on these 7 mountains. Okay? Basically, the woman's representing Rome also. Okay? All right? She's drunk on the blood of the saints and on the blood of the witnesses to Jesus. And there's a description. I mean, 17 focuses on this woman. Chapter 18 focuses then on Babylon itself, the fall of Babylon. It has fallen. Babylon the Great has fallen. Interesting verse 21. Then a mighty angel picked up a stone like a large millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, "In this way Babylon the great city will be thrown down violently and never be found again." It's pretty clear that the original audience would have understood that Rome was going to be completely obliterated. I visited Rome about 12 years ago. It didn't look obliterated to me. It's a big city. It's got lots of old buildings, dating back to this time even. Yeah. They would have expected this to happen at the time that the beast was destroyed. Okay? That beast, that Roman Empire that persecutes the saints, no longer exists, does it? The false prophet no longer exists. So yeah, that's a difficulty here. We then see the defeat of the beast. First, though, there's celebration. Okay? Again, we keep seeing this spiritual perspective on it. Okay? There's celebration about what's going on. There's celebration and worship, and there's the marriage feast of the Lamb, Jesus. Okay? And then we see a rider on a white horse. Very, very clear description here that indicates he's talking about Jesus, King of Kings and Lord of Lords, he mentions, among other things like the sharp two-edged sword coming from his mouth. Same language he used back in chapter 1 to describe Jesus. So, is this talking about the second coming? I'll put it this way. If either this is talking about the second coming or the Revelation doesn't talk about the second coming, take your pick. Okay, I think the original audience would have thought he's talking about the second coming. I don't think Jesus came at the time of the defeat of the beast. If he did, it was a lot quieter than what he told everybody he was going to be. Okay, that's the difficulty that we have here. All right? The beast was taken prisoner, and along with him the false prophet, who had performed the signs in his presence. Both of them were thrown alive into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur. Okay? They're gone. They're destroyed. Okay? This empire that was persecuting God's people, okay, that persecutor no longer exists. Nor does this emperor cult worship that went along with it. And that leads us into chapter 20 because, yeah, the beast and the false prophet, they're out of the picture. They're gone. What about the dragon? Okay? The dragon was kind of what started all of this, right? The dragon's still around. So, chapter 20 talks about the defeat of the dragon or Satan. He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. He threw him into the abyss, closed it, and put a seal on it, so that he would no longer deceive the nations until the 1,000 years were completed. After that, he must be released for a short time. Okay, so here's the millennium that you hear so much about, right? 1,000 years. Has this happened? Well, has the devil been bound? Has he been, put put in this abyss so he can no longer deceive the nations? Well, it's not clear that that's happened, is it? What about this 1,000 years? Again, I wouldn't take the number literally. Okay? One thing that I would take from it, though, is it's a long time. The other lengths of time that are talked about in Revelation are like 42 months. Okay? They're pretty short compared to this. Is a much longer time than anything else that's discussed in Revelation. And, we've been talking about the difficulties, the aspects of history that have not unfolded the way the original audience might have understood this. But we really haven't talked about the other side of it. Okay? How much has unfolded the way they would have understood this? And if you take a big picture view of some things, I think you can see, all right? Was the beast defeated? Yeah, the Roman Empire is not around anymore. And even if you back up before the fall of the Roman Empire, at the beginning of the 4th century, I mentioned this last week, at the beginning of the 4th century, the Roman emperor became a Christian. Christianity was legalized. Christianity basically came to power. Okay? And that persecutor is gone. The empire's still there, but it's not persecuting the church. The false prophet is gone. Okay, there's no longer this emperor worship cult. It's gone. Okay, that happened, within 250 years of when this was written. Okay, and what about that 1,000 years? Well, how would they have understood it? They would have understood it as a time after the beast and the false prophet were defeated, when Satan no longer is influencing the nations the way that he has been. Okay? Well, actually, I'm not going to say he wasn't influencing anybody or that he wasn't influencing the nations, but things had changed by that point. Okay? He was no longer in power. For better or for worse, the church was in power. I say for better or for worse because that power had a tendency to corrupt over the years. But the church was in power for an extended period of time, several hundred years in the area where these 7 churches were that he was writing to, okay, until the Turkish forces brought Islam and conquered the Byzantine Empire. And they stayed in power in Western Europe, or in much of Europe actually, even beyond that. And so perhaps on some level, we see a fulfillment the way they would have expected. At least kind of the way they would have expected. Okay? And I think this is important because of what happens next. Because if we're looking at big picture things here that are being fulfilled, what's the next big picture thing in all of this? Satan's defeat. Okay? Satan has been behind this the whole time. This has all been leading up to Satan's defeat, his final defeat. The devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur where the beast and the false prophet are, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. And I think, however we might understand some of the details and some of the things that are talked about in Revelation, I think we can take confidence in Satan's ultimate defeat. That is a big picture item in what John is communicating here. Satan ultimately will be defeated totally. And what does that lead to? Well, okay, I should mention before we get there, death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. Okay, Hades here, that's when you see the word Hades in the New Testament, that's the abode of the dead. Doesn't necessarily imply judgment here. All right, it's kind of like the grave in the Old Testament, or Sheol, you'll see used in the Old Testament. All right? Basically, he's talking about death. When he says death and Hades, death was thrown into the lake of fire. Death doesn't exist anymore. Okay? This is the second death, the lake of fire, and anyone not found written in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire. That's the bad news. Okay? The good news follows in the last two chapters. The New Jerusalem. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea no longer existed. I also saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared like a bride adorned for her husband. Then I heard a loud voice from the throne, "Look, God's dwelling is with humanity. He will live with them. They will be His people, and God Himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death will no longer exist. Grief, crying, and pain will exist no longer, because the previous things have passed away." This is what we can look forward to. Okay? This is the ultimate victory. All right? This is the ultimate victory, not only over the persecutor, but over Satan himself, over death itself. In the last two chapters, they go on and describe this city in much more detail. I encourage you to read through it if you haven't lately. I just want to finish with one thing from chapter 22. Both the Spirit and the bride say, "Come." Anyone who hears should say, "Come." And the one who is thirsty should come. Whoever desires should take the living water as a gift. This is something that is offered. It's a gift that's offered to each one of us. We can be a part of the winning team, so to speak. We can be with God forever and not have to worry about death and Satan. We can be in His very presence and experience the full joy of being in the presence of God. If you would like to take advantage of that this morning, we can baptize you. We invite you to come forward if you have anything that we can do for you this morning.